We begin this hour with President Trump's priorities, which are as clear as day. The first is continuing to advance the lie that the 2020 election he lost was stolen. That was evident as he laid out marching orders for Bill Pulte, his newly installed acting director of national intelligence.
And it's an acting position. It's not a permanent. He's not going to be permanent because, I don't think he'd want to be permanent. But he's a very smart guy, and he may find out some things about the rigged elections.
Not really the job of the DNI, but who cares? And then there's his second priority, to cast doubt on this fall's midterm elections. As he continues his pattern of pushing election conspiracies, making unsubstantiated claims of election cheating by Democrats in this week's California's primary elections. The U.S. Attorney's Office in L.A. claims it has opened, quote, multiple election fraud investigations into California's elections. The office also sent a federal prosecutor to monitor counting at a center in Los Angeles on Friday. President Trump hasn't provided, as he almost never does, no evidence, and federal officials haven't provided specific allegations of fraud occurring in this week's elections. But Trump's focus on California is poised to have significant consequences for November's midterm elections, with California set to have a potentially decisive role in determining party control of Congress. Joining us now, Sky Perryman, the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, Miles Taylor, former DHS chief of staff during Trump's first term and Defiance.org founder. Thank you both for joining us. It's all very depressing and disturbing. Sky, I'm going to start with the positive because I feel like we usually get there. But you are on this election protection task force. I think you guys have met twice. What does the fight look like when we can see in bright day what Donald Trump wants to do and how he might be behaving in November? What is the other side working on?
The American people are going to be able to vote, and we're going to make sure their votes are counted. And that is what this fight looks like. So that is a complex fight right now, because in addition to having to fight rampant voter suppression throughout many states, including the South, as well as the GOP's efforts to try to stomp on people's representation following the Supreme Court's decision in Louisiana v. Calais, you have an executive branch that is actively seeking to undermine confidence in our elections and actively seeking to scare people into not voting. And so this is a fight on all fronts. It is one that is not just in two meetings. It's that task force. We come together in order to make sure we're sharing information, but it is something that is happening day and night. And we want to make sure the American people know that there are lawyers that are going to fight every single day, day and night, but it's also going to take the people. And what we're seeing in communities across the country is that people are not going to tolerate this administration or any other actor trying to prevent them from voting and trying to scare people. But that's the work between now and November.
What are the contours of that fight as it stands right now? Like, what are the specifics of what you're working on?
So it's everything. So you have a White House that engages in unhinged and unlawful and threatening executive action. We have been able to strike down most of that in the courts, and we'll continue to win. But every day that they do a Truth Social post or a White House press conference where they're trying to scare people and gin up drama, we have to make sure that they are swiftly met in court where they're taking unlawful actions, and that we're meeting the moment by making sure the American people know that we're going to continue to go to court and win against this president, as we have done every single day since inauguration. Then there's what's happening in the South, which is an attempt to undermine the ability of people to vote, of black and brown people to vote, and you are seeing communities push back in their own communities, but it's also about turnout. And it's about making sure that however you draw those lines, people are going to turn out and they're going to make their voices heard. This administration, this president and his allies has the lowest approval rating, historically low approval ratings. There's no question what's going to happen in November. The question is how we're going to protect what happens in November. So that's a piece of the fight. The other thing is we are not immune to or naive about third-party actors that live in this country or that want to live in this country, the Elon Musks of the world, the sort of, third-party actors that have sought to aid and abet this administration's misinformation and disinformation. And so you're going to see a fight on that front as well. If people seek to spread misinformation and disinformation, that violates the law, and they should expect to be met in court, even if they're a big corporation. So that's a piece of it. And then there's the piece about building and facilitating and fostering these deep communities that are coming together in all kinds of inspiring ways across the country to make sure that people have the fuel they need, the community they need to be able to do what we need to do in November, which is to be very clear that people have tried to prevent the American people from voting in the past. They're going to try to prevent them from doing that this November, and we're not going to tolerate it as a country.
You know, Miles, so the president trying to gin up drama and fear among the American electorate about voting. Another priority of his is something that you raised an alarm about, I noticed, on Substack. And this was a move that the president, something the president signed that shifted, was it 8,000 federal workers from civil service to political appointees. Talk about why that's such an alarming thing, and what does that do, speaking of contours, what does that do to the contours of the federal government?
I think this was one of the most underreported stories of the week. President of the United States signs an executive order to take 8,000 civil service jobs, apolitical, non-political jobs, the top jobs that sit right underneath the people a president can appoint to run departments and agencies, the directors, the chiefs of staff, waves a magic wand and basically turns them into people who serve at the pleasure of the president, that he can fire at will like he can with his political appointees. That effectively triples the number of people inside the executive branch that the president can directly fire at will, from the 4,000 a president can appoint to the 12,000. Why does that matter? Things that you've seen, slush funds, ballrooms, they require people to say yes. They require people willing to execute things. And this administration has found that they get to a certain level and there's folks saying, hi, I don't want to serve time in federal prison for Donald J. Trump. I'm going to refer this idea to the general counsel's office, who will tell you it's illegal. They don't want those people there anymore. They would like the president to be able to fire those people so there can be more slush funds, more ballrooms. But I'm going to tell you, that also means more reason for Sky and her colleagues to take them to federal court. Unfortunately, this fight is going to get much bigger because he's adding more stormtroopers onto the battlefield.
And we announced this week, I mean, that is going to be met in court like every other attempt this administration has made to try to undermine and politicize our civil service. And the slush fund is blocked because of the courts, because of our lawsuit in the courts, as is the ballroom monstrosity. And so he can do this. He can try to affect a media cycle, which is really, to be honest with you, it's about trying to get people to think there's nothing they can do and to give up. And what our work is evidence of every day, what your commentary and people speaking out is evidence of every day, is that that's not working with this president, but we just have to keep going and we have to move quite quickly, because the American people and the way the information is fed to them is to make all of us believe that we don't have power when we see every day. I mean, that slush fund's not writing checks this weekend, and that's because people went to court and blocked it. And I don't know how many news cycles we had to have here where everybody was saying who's going to stop it, what's going to happen. You know, we're going to go stop it, but also backed up by the people.
President Trump just told Kristen Welker in an interview on NBC that he actually, despite what Todd Blanche had to say earlier this week about the anti-weaponization fund, he would not rule out giving January 6th rioters money from that fund. Todd Blanche is obviously facing now a confirmation process, Miles. He is the acting attorney general. Trump just said he was going to name him as the permanent. And Todd Blanche, in turn, went on News Nation and said this.
Well, do I believe it's a possibility that the Democrats will go after President Trump, his family, anybody that knows him, anybody that worked for him? I think they've proven that to be true. And what can we do about it is we can just keep on exposing. When we learn about the weaponization that happened for many years, we can keep on exposing it and putting roadblocks in place so it never happens again.
So, Miles, if you are a Republican senator who's frustrated with this administration and the anti-weaponization fund in particular, how do you reconcile comments like this from Todd Blanche, claiming at the beginning of the week that they would drop the fund, then saying, asking that the DOJ, that the courts not pursue legal recourse with making sure that the fund is blocked, to now the president being open to this? I mean, How are lawmakers supposed to make their decision on whether or not they think he's a good choice here?
If you're a Republican senator, you're picking up the phone and calling the White House and saying, stop dressing up your sock puppet like a clown because it's going to make it hard for me to win re-election. They've gone from slush fund to mini slush funds. Republican senators wanted them to kill this because they said, I can't have slush fund on every billboard driving around my district when I'm running for re-election. And now we're going to stick on those billboards mini slush fund, ballroom supporter. Those things have not been taken off the table by the Department of Justice. And you're going to see Republican senators very frustrated about that and saying, this guy's not going to get my vote unless y'all do something more concrete. Now, I don't want to pretend that that resistance to the administration is going to be powerful. I don't describe GOP senators as the resistance. They're more like the reluctance. They're like the gentle reluctance right now. They can't go along with President Trump's agenda. But if they don't push back hard, a number of these guys are going to lose their races and the Senate's going to flip. So
well, it's too late. I feel like, we had that couple days where I think D.C. was getting really excited about the YOLO caucus. And, oh, my God, they found their spine. It doesn't matter because, and Jack, I'm really curious what you have to say, but when I talk to folks around President Trump, people that are working in the White House right now, what they will tell you is, what they have told me is, it doesn't matter. You can stand up and send a mean tweet and say, oh, I really wish he just wouldn't do that. And President Trump doesn't care. They should have done this a year plus ago.
I mean, if you're looking at Susan Collins, right, she's one of the most vulnerable Republicans. She's facing the stiffest competition she's faced in her recent career. And she's not standing up as a bulwark against Trump. That's not the position she's taking.
No, but she's concerned. She's very concerned.
She's very concerned. Well, I will just say one last thing about this. The place you will see additional pressure placed is on the lieutenants to Donald Trump. It's not just the Todd Blanche's, it's the Todd Blanche's deputies, because people are starting to be put on notice by Sky's organization, by Defiance.org, and others that they're going to be watched well after this administration for the things they do lawfully or unlawfully for this administration.
Accountability is what it's called. And we also want to point out one other thing that President Trump said. When Trump said that they're cheating on the election, Welker asked if he had evidence supporting that claim. Quote, all I have to do is look, the president said.
Everyone has been looking.
He's been looking for years. He's been looking for years. I mean, remember the Pence-Kobach Voter Commission in 2017? This president wanted to change the election count because he was upset that he didn't win the popular vote when Secretary Clinton won the popular vote. And it was their own commission that they set up with their own people, and they could not find a single instance of fraud. And it ended up being disbanded in the wake of litigation that we and others filed. And I think that is what you're going to continue to see here, but it's going to require every single American to push, because it looks like the GOP, the Senate, isn't pushing. It's going to require every single American to use their voice, and, of course, us to continue to use the courts.
Guy Perryman, Miles Taylor, as always, thank you both very much for coming to The Weekend.